2 Timothy 2, and we're ready now for verse 20. And I'm not sure that there has to be this big connection between what came just before and what we're going to look at in verse 20. So I'm not going to bother with it unless it becomes obvious that we've got a connection, right? Okay, verse 20. In a large house, there are articles not only of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay. Some are for special purposes, and some for common use. Going on to verse 21. Those who cleanse themselves from the latter will be instruments for special purposes, made holy, useful to the master, and prepared to do any good work. What he's doing is drawing a word picture. When he talks about a large house, bear in mind what's basically true today was also true in the first century in the world Paul lived in, and Timothy. A big house, poor people didn't have big houses. Wealthy people did. And while poor people, pardon me, basically lived at a subsistence level, rich people, they did what they want and got what they wanted. That's a little bit like today, right? Well, here's one big difference between, anyway, on the economic scale, between 21st century and the first century. There really was, I don't think you could talk about a middle class. There were the rich and the poor. Now, there was this range of poverty, right? Everything from destitute to living at the top end of wherever the poverty line was. But we have in America our largest demographic, our largest population are the middle class. And virtually, I think it's safe to say virtually all of the middle class that we have today would have been at the very top end of the poverty class in century one. Okay, well, I don't know why I feel like I have to go into all that stuff. Paul is not talking about even a nice size house. Most houses in his day had 2 rooms, maybe. The kitchen was probably outside. There's many reasons for that. One is this was true in colonial America. If you get to go to colonial Williamsburg or Washington, D.C., tour. I remember touring George Washington's house, and the kitchen was a separate building away from the big house. Well, the reason, 2 reasons. Big reason was the kitchen was the greatest fire hazard in the entire probably on the entire property at Mount Vernon. Well, a similar kind of thing in Century 1. They cooked outside. And in the part of the world where Paul and Timothy lived, although Paul was so itinerant, it's hard to say where he lived, but in Ephesus, the climate made it possible nearly all the year round to cook outside. You kept the heat of the fire away from the main dwelling. You kept the fire of the fire away. And the other thing you kept away was the smoke. Okay, golly, I gotta quit going off on all this stuff. A large house. We're talking about the house of a wealthy person. Paul wasn't talking about Timothy's house. He wasn't talking about his house because he had no house. But a wealthy person in their house, they would have had, he lists them, articles not only of gold and silver. Yeah, these were still, even in Paul's day, those were the two most precious metals, gold and silver. And you didn't have gold and silver articles in your house if you weren't wealthy. But he says, okay, but that's not all they had. They also had wood and clay. These would have been your Walmart dishes, right? Common, ordinary vessels, bowls, and dishes. And then he said, some are for special purpose. Well, that would be the gold and silver, right? You don't just, a normal lunch on your gold and silver platter, unless you're the emperor, and then everything you have probably is gold and silver. But even the wealthy didn't do that. So they were reserved for special purposes and some for common use. Okay, that's me. Wood and clay. These were inexpensive, easily accessible. Now, Paul kind of twists the picture a little. Well, not twist it, but he turns it. Those who cleanse themselves from the latter, meaning common use, we're going to come and talk more about that, will be instruments for special purposes. All right. How do you, first of all, you cleanse yourself from the latter, from the uses of wood and clay, common uses? Well, all right, let's think about life as a whole. In Paul's day and in ours, what is most common? Well, this would have been true in the Roman Empire, and I believe it's becoming more and more true in America, that what is most common is a very God-absent, not necessarily a God-hating, but certainly God-absent mentality, where lots and lots of people, okay, I'm not an atheist, but I don't really, think about God. I'm good with God as long as he stays out of my business. To me, that's the common mentality. I run across it all the time, sadly, and I know this could be the result of my bias. I see it in Christians. Well, yeah, I love God. I'm just not real crazy about him getting in my way. If we cleanse ourselves from the common, I don't know, I'm not even sure the words I would use, God ignoring or God unfactored or as not a factor. You see what I'm saying? Okay, much of that is a result of sin. Some is a result of ignorance, and I don't mean that in the disparaging way. I mean it, they just don't know any better. Nobody's taught them. They've never learned. But a lot of it has to do with we don't want to learn that because it would make our lives, the things would get a little inconvenient for us. Well, all right. How do I cleanse myself of those things? This indicates that I have a role, right? If I'm going to cleanse myself, but you gotta look at it carefully. don't mistake, and in my experience from time I was a little kid, I think a lot of people would have looked at this, cleanse yourself, as a pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. Get her done. This is up to you. If it's going to be, it's up to me. Not exactly. Because how we cleanse ourselves is through a partnership with a holy God. Through Christ, our relationship to God is secured. He makes us holy. And that's what Paul writes it. He said the latter, if we cleanse ourselves from the latter, will be instruments for special purposes made holy. Who makes you and me holy? Interesting question. In other places, Paul writes about how God has made us holy. It is his doing. Our role is to accept the holiness that we have, the holiness of Christ. Now, it would be it'd be crazy for me to think, well, I've got the holiness of God. I mean, he imputes that to me, right? He gives that to me. He counts that of me. So it's God. It's all God. I don't have to do anything. Really? No, there's a partnership here. I don't do these things so that I will be made holy. I do these things because he has counted me. He is counting me holy. How do I cleanse myself from the latter, from these common uses, to follow Paul's word picture, these uses that are not special? I cleanse myself by partnering and participating, applying my effort to God's, in partnership with the Holy Spirit in my life as he cleanses me. He cleans me up. I work with people a lot who are and I am one of these, so it's not like, oh, those people. I am in the process of cleansing myself. It's a daily, moment by moment process of yielding to God's design instead of grasping and holding on to mine. If we cleanse ourselves from these common uses, the unspecial, not special uses. It's not about the vessel at this point. It's about the use. Because I see myself, and I'm learning to love myself, but I'm not a silver or gold bowl. I'm just a peanut butter jar. Well, it's not the instrument that we're talking about. It's the use. Those who cleanse themselves from the latter will be instruments for special purposes. That God would use a peanut butter jar like me for a special purpose is a little bit overwhelming to me. Okay, now here let's step back and take a little bit of a broad look. God then causes it. He brings it to pass that I am now an instrument for special uses. I don't think that he's making my peanut butter jar into a golden bowl, but he's using my peanut butter jar in special ways. Why? Well, 2 reasons. Because that's how he is. It is his nature. to take the common and transform it for special purposes. And the second thing is he trusts. He entrusts you and me. Now, you may be a gold or silver bowl, but you may not. You may, like me, be a peanut butter jar. Even that vessel is entrusted with special purpose. Well, I've gone over my time, and I haven't really gone where I want.